You are sitting in an anonymous rental sedan, parked against the curb in Vienna. The rain drizzles, drumming a steady rhythm on the roof. Holding a cheap plastic ballpoint pen, you quietly note the shift changes of the guard detail at the complex across the street. A dull surveillance job, purely mechanical statistics. The stifling silence in the cabin suddenly unlocks an old data file. The damp smell of the AC drags your nervous system back to a suffocating afternoon. In the Korengal Valley, 8 years ago, battlefield dust clung to your frayed Kevlar armor. You sat on the violently shaking aluminum bench of a Black Hawk, ears deafened by the rotors slashing through the thin air. The scratched M4 on your thigh still reeked of burnt brass. You had just completed a bloody operation that didn't exist on any command map, surrounded by the proud nods of your squad mates. You were the absolute elite, apex predators, at the top of the military food chain. But amidst the roar of the cooling engines, your emotional system registered only an absolute emptiness. Every victory, every bloodstain, every act of survival were merely variables, waiting to be quantified into dry reports on politicians' desks. You realized you were no hero. You were just a high-grade mechanical component waiting for its expiration date. Rank 1. The erased elite. It was that cold realization that completely neutralized your military pride, paving the way for a vacuum to swallow you whole. The thrum of the helicopter blades faded, replaced by the low hum of a ventilation system. You left the gunpowder-choked battlefield to step into a dead-silent briefing room in Virginia, the genesis of every whitewash. The clinking of a spoon against a porcelain mug. The slow, dry rustling of papers. You used to be the best, elite special ops. You were used to medals and looks of awe. You thought you understood the price of courage. You were wrong. That woman came to you. No rank, no name tag. Her bland face was the kind you'd completely forget 5 seconds after looking away. She slid an unletterheaded piece of paper across the table. A proposal. Join a unit that doesn't exist. Your military record will be stamped retired in some boring town. There will be no flag draped over your coffin if you fall. The woman waited in silence. Why would you accept this erasure? There's no glory here. You stared at the quiet table. In your mind, your mother's smile appeared. The image of your father by the fireplace. A normal life you once yearned for. But you had witnessed enough bloody borders to understand just how fragile the peace in that house truly was. Someone needed to step entirely into the dark to keep the light out there intact. A brutal trade-off. You willingly sold your identity. You sacrificed your life to protect a world that would never know you existed. You nodded. That was the first incision in stripping away your humanity. The scratch of a red pen crossing out a line. A silent pause. That sharp signature on the blank paper officially stripped away your armed combat identity, tossing you into a quiet night parking lot in the American South. Sitting in a deserted train station waiting room, looking at the cold coffee, reflecting a face slowly fading away, you suddenly understood. The soldier bearing your name yesterday had officially been erased. You were now just a mute cog, willingly stepping into a machine that would begin to wholly erode your identity and the rest of your life. Rank 2. The exposed trainee. The wind-tearing shriek of the train pierced the night. The train taking you away from that desolate station didn't lead to a battlefield. It delivered you into a soft prison built of language and tedious routines. Training Day 14. Target. A middle-aged male carrying a frayed leather briefcase. Location. Subway line. 4 transit station and surrounding areas. Your mission was quantified by the system into a single directive. Tail for 12 hours. No contact. Absolutely no trace left behind. You used to be a manhunting machine in Kandahar, but urban concrete has its own laws. Here, your survival radar misfires. 14:30. The target stops to buy a coffee. You stand 15 meters away. Instead of pretending to scroll your phone like a sluggish office worker, your eyes automatically sweep the 3 emergency exits of the station. A combat reflex. The shoeshine guy on the curb stops tapping his brush. He's counterintelligence. You are exposed for the first time. 16:45. Inside a deserted laundromat, the target sits reading a newspaper. You pick a plastic chair in the corner, but your back doesn't touch the backrest. Your spine maintains a perfect 90-degree angle, heels slightly raised. Civilians don't sit like that waiting for their clothes to dry. They slump. They are exhausted. Your military discipline has betrayed you. The middle-aged woman folding bedsheets at washer number 3 looks up. Eye contact. Counterintelligence again. You are exposed for the second time. 23. Personnel assessment room. No insults, no physical punishment. The evaluator merely slides a tablet across the cold metal table. On the screen is the security footage from the laundromat. You are sitting there, watching yourself. The analytical report pops up. Jaw clenched, stride 2 uniform, broad spectrum vigilance. In this bureaucratic machine, maintaining the dignity and bearing of a soldier is a fatal system error. You failed because your ego refused to be dissolved. You still looked like a soldier, and soldiers always draw the eye. The project's washout rate was pegged at 90%. The organization didn't eliminate the weak. 90% of the candidates were cut. That horrifying failure rate wasn't about the physical tests. Delta operators, SEAL snipers, Green Beret captains all sent packing. The officer who liked to brag about his kills. The guy who couldn't stand his achievements being forgotten. The soldier with the overly charming smile. The 6'3" man who couldn't hide his physique. All vanished. You realized a cruel law. In the world out there, excellence makes a hero. But at the bottom of this system, excellence is a death sentence. Pride is the biggest security flaw of all. You sat back in the dark room, watching the red cherry of a cigarette burn down on the edge of the ashtray. The ego surgery began. You plotted the self-destruction of your own excellence. You had to learn to relax your jaw. You had to practice dragging your feet into a misshapen shuffle. You actively lowered your existential frequency to 0. This shadow institution wasn't recruiting heroes for magazine covers. It needed you to become a perfect byproduct of the crowd, a faded ghost that security cameras could record 1,000 times, yet no analyst would ever bother to press pause for. Rank 3, the scholar of the mundane. It was this perfect erasure of ego during surveillance drills that bought you a one-way ticket to North Africa. New cover established. Klaus Richter, industrial machinery parts specialist. A gray-suited title, specifically designed to lull all suspicion to sleep. At this level, you were no longer someone learning to evade the gaze. You entered a new cycle. You became a scholar. The scholar of the mundane. Your target was a financier. On bureaucratic paper, he was a model citizen. He paid taxes. He attended charity galas. In the shadows, $5 million a month flowed from his accounts, straight into the pockets of suicide bombers. Your mission was not to draw a weapon and terminate him. Your mission was to read his entire ecosystem with absolute stillness. You rented a mid-range apartment. You went to the supermarket, bought frozen food, hit the gym on a fixed schedule. For 2 grueling months, you built a bland loop of a life. The torment began to erode your psyche. You were wasting the real time of your life living a fake one, playing a non-existent person, just to be a bystander on the fringes of a murderer's portrait. You began appearing in the target's peripheral vision, the mosque on Friday mornings, the cafe on Thursday afternoons. You ordered the same drink. You stared blankly at the words on an old newspaper. You never looked up. You never made eye contact. But you collected every piece of microdata. You knew where he ate lunch. You knew he was having an affair on Tuesdays. You understood his breathing patterns better than his own family did. This understanding brought a ruthless kind of power. Every habit, every deeply human weakness of his was dissected by you, encrypted into dry strings of characters, emotionless files that bounced through 6 relay stations before landing on a soulless server halfway across the globe. Then his counterintelligence network showed up. A car parked slightly out of its usual spot, a stiff figure on the street corner. Your internal risk alert system flashed red. You quietly withdrew, fading into the dark corner of a silent parking lot. The report was sent. The tech team took over. The target's courier was acquired. In his hotel room, the target was chemically neutralized. The financial dossiers were photographed in the dark. Not a single drop of blood was spilled. $40 million were frozen. 3 massacres in Paris, London, and Bangkok were neutralized in the crib. 200 lives were spared. But no news bulletin would ever mention the name Klaus Richter. The organization quietly terminated the lease. You left behind half-drunk cups of tea, a fridge full of frozen food, and a fake persona that had just completed its life cycle. Standing at the airport departure terminal, waiting for your next flight, you realized a bitter paradox. You had just saved hundreds of lives by becoming someone who never existed. Rank 4. The Phantom Businessman. The quiet passenger cabin of the night flight dropped you into a deeper layer of forgery. 17 identities, 12 countries. This time, the system tasked you with extracting a nuclear scientist and his family from the heart of enemy territory. No helicopter support, no paratroopers. The exfiltration protocol was operated entirely through ruthless bureaucratic procedures. You established contact through the scientist's daughter's piano teacher, a deep cover agent who had been waiting for 3 years. There was only one chance, no do-overs if anything went wrong. The dry clack of a circuit breaker. The space sank into a suffocating silence. Evacuation night had begun. The city's power grid went dark. The tech team had made their move. In the pitch black, you navigated 4 people through alleys reeking of garbage. No gunshots. Only tightly suppressed panting. At the first checkpoint, a wad of crumpled cash slid through the glass window. The guard pocketed the money, certain he had just been bribed by smugglers. You ushered them onto a rusted fishing boat. 8 hours adrift on a nameless sea. The pungent smell of engine oil. The 7-year-old daughter was violently seasick. You knelt on the damp wooden deck, holding back her tangled hair as she vomited over the side of the boat. She whispered, asking if this was an adventure. You nodded, staying silent so she would believe the lie. 2 grueling weeks passed, moving from one safe house to another, traveling by night, sleeping heavily by day. Every sweep of headlights across the curtains could be a death sentence. The final rally point was a dirt runway in the middle of the desert, an unmarked plane. Dry handshakes with nameless men. The scientists survived. The atomic bomb was never built. But torment crept through your mind. A cruel, unspoken law emerged. You were protecting the family of a stranger by single-handedly destroying your own. The divorce had happened in silence. Your wife left. 6 of your son's birthday cakes were missed. The next morning, politicians smiled on television. As for you, you were just sitting in a deserted airport diner, lighting a cigarette, watching the ash fall onto the aluminum table. The savior of the world, permanently stripped of the right to be a real person. No thank you notes, no pension. You had become the system's finest phantom businessman, forever stripped of the right to be a real human being. Rank 5. The Void Mapper. Another 14 months living as a ghost. This time, the bureaucracy tossed a razor-thin file onto the desk. A dry red light blinked on the monitor. Target. Bomb maker. Codename. The Engineer. 200 lives had evaporated, yet he himself hadn't left a single line of code on the global radar. No phone, no email. The only photo was a blurry young man from 10 years ago. Billions of dollars in surveillance satellites had failed. Finally, the system resorted to using you. The organization's unspoken law taught you an inhumane principle. When you cannot see the prey, measure the void it creates. Wherever he is, there will be a distortion in the data. You began investigating from what seemed like nothingness. In Turkey, under the guise of a burnt-out journalist, you logged the schedule of the doctor distributing his diabetes medication. Over in Jordan, in a red dust-covered aid worker's uniform, you silently copied the financial network of his brother. In Pakistan, you sipped cold tea, indifferently listening in on supply trucks, heading into the remote mountains. 3 covers, 3 countries, 15 squalid motels. Your only weapon was an eerie, terrifying patience. The data cobweb finally cornered him at a quiet compound. You didn't storm in. You just sat on a hill, half a kilometer away, smiling and drinking tea with the hospitable village elder. Your lifeless eyes recorded every mechanical detail. Guards change shifts every 4 hours. 2 men on the roof. Dark-tinted SUV appears at midnight. The GPS coordinates were locked down to the meter, quietly encrypted into a lethal signal string. The mission ended with a handshake. You thanked the people who had taken you in, knowing full well that this area was about to be leveled. 72 hours later, you sat in a suffocating border motel room, watching the muted news flicker through the TV static. A denied military incident. The target had been wiped out. The world's nightmare was over. But in the darkness of the present, as cigarette ash fluttered down onto the edge of the old newspaper, you felt the absolute fracturing of your conscience. You had saved thousands of nameless lives by exploiting and indirectly sentencing to death the very people who had opened their doors to you. You measured the villain's void long enough, until you realized a silent tragedy. You yourself had morphed into a bottomless void, a hollow entity, swallowing all humanity in exchange for the safety of a world that would never know you existed. Rank 6. The Psychological Vagrant. The ventilation fan buzzed. You left the dirt runway in the middle of the desert, carrying the lives of millions, to return to a familiar emptiness. Your own shabby studio apartment. You had held the lease under your name for 10 years, but the total number of nights spent sleeping on that sunken mattress was less than 30. 37 operations, 17 identities, 12 countries. The system had cycled you through so many lifetimes that your original ego had been diluted into nothingness. You almost forgot who you were. You were a chaotic collection of borrowed lives. Bureaucratic erosion had completely stripped away the concept of home. The organization could provide perfect forged documents, but no one issued you a sanctuary in your own mind. There were nights you woke up with a start, your shirt drenched in cold sweat. You were arguing in your dreams in an Arabic dialect. For exactly 5 fateful seconds, you stared blankly at the ceiling, utterly unable to remember your real name. You bolted up in panic, rummaging through drawers, stroking the embossed letters on your expired, real passport, just to confirm to yourself that you had once been born into this world. You had officially become a psychological vagrant right inside your own cover. The real pressure didn't come from the enemy's gun barrel. It came from the faces erased by the system. The courier at the hotel all those years ago. When the cleanup crew moved in to sweep the room, you saw the photo hastily shoved in his wallet. 3 kids. The youngest about 4 years old. The system called it collateral damage. You called it a life sentence for your conscience. Every time you closed your eyes, you saw yourself single-handedly pushing those children into orphanhood. You understood a brutal truth of this career. To maintain peace, Someone must be willing to turn their own hands immoral. So what keeps a ghost walking in the dark? 3 weeks ago, a short news ticker ran at the bottom of a muted screen. A bomb had failed to detonate at a shopping mall in Virginia. 200 ordinary people returned home safely. Mothers cooking dinner, fathers reading newspapers, kids trying on sneakers. Not a single one of them knew about the 20-page report you had typed up in a squalid motel half a world away. No one knew a nameless system had saved their lives. You looked straight at the gray screen. A bitter, cold serenity swelled up. That was the only reward this machine ever paid you. You willingly became an invisible wanderer, a byproduct of the crowd, just so those strangers out there would forever retain the right to keep their peaceful homes. Rank 7. The Nameless Ferryman. The years fluttered down onto the yellowed coffee stains on the wooden table. You are sitting in an anonymous cafe in Europe, or maybe America. This rare sliver of quiet time cannot extinguish your habit of analyzing data. Your hair has grayed. Your face has now been molded by the system to absolute perfection. Bland. Empty. Making anyone sitting across from you automatically forget it a mere 5 minutes after meeting you. You direct your gaze at the young man at table number 4. He's fit, alert, but his spinal posture is far too rigid. His eyes constantly dart to his watch. An amateur rookie. He is executing an undercover surveillance test, convinced he is completely invisible. You peg his nature in exactly 3 seconds. That arrogant and tense look in his eyes. It was you 20 years ago, before the bureaucratic covers swallowed you whole. You understand his every technical margin of error. You could teach him how to hide his mouth movements behind the rim of his cup, how to gather microdata through reflections on glass windows instead of turning his head, how to synchronize his stride with the cycle of the traffic lights, how to completely obliterate his ego to vanish into a crowd of merely 3 people. But you remain silent. The organization's unspoken law is an absolute soundproof barrier. He doesn't know you exist, and he is forever forbidden from knowing. Your current title is a brutal irony. A teacher without a podium. You hold classes at facilities without coordinates, imparting a curriculum that is never written down, to mold the next generation of ghosts. You are the nameless ferryman, diligently guiding idealistic young men across the river of psychological corruption, straight into the system's void. That young man might lose his life at some strange latitude. Or, more tragically, he will excel and survive, only to become a sealed classified file. By the time that hardcover is opened, everyone he ever loved will have turned to dust. That is the law of equivalent exchange. You cannot intervene. You fold your newspaper, place the exact change on the table, not a penny extra, to avoid giving the impression of a generous man. You walk outside. The blinding sunlight beats down on couples holding hands, on kids going to school. The world continues to run peacefully, thanks to organizations that have never existed. You blend into the crowd. Just a strange face, easy to forget, invisible. You keep walking, quietly completing the final disappearance of your life. Rank 8. The Silent Observer. You leave behind the blinding light of the city streets to retreat deep into the final quiet space, your own real life. The withdrawal of an invisible operative doesn't come with a farewell party. No gold watch engraved with your name. No retirement file to declare to the tax bureau. The ultimate cover the system issues is called normalcy. An empty house in the suburbs, a narrow yard, and tedious routines. But the operating system in your mind refuses the shutdown command. You are permanently trapped between lines of soulless reports. You stand watering the flower bed on the porch, but your vision still automatically surveils the surroundings, like a reflex ingrained in your subconscious. The gray sedan loops the intersection twice, an abnormal trajectory. The mailman lingers on the lawn across the street for more than 15 seconds. A suspicious delay. Tradecraft reflexes never disappear. They merely lie dormant beneath wrinkled skin, ready to surge at the sight of any pattern violation. You realize you are an entity permanently trapped in a state of total hypervigilance, a psychological prison without bars. The cruelest lesson of the Shadow Institution isn't found on the battlefield, but in peacetime. You dedicated your entire life to protecting the most priceless things: the sound of children playing, the tranquility of dusk, the warm dinners of millions of families. But tragically, that process of dedication surgically excised your own capacity to enjoy them. You have been permanently erased from the canvas of humanity. You are nothing more than a silent observer, a biological camera left forgotten on the fringes of reality, forever standing outside the happiness you created. The world continues to run smoothly, propped up by individuals who were never allowed to exist. You softly stub out your cigarette on the stone ledge. The night slowly swallows the porch. You sit there, motionless, perfectly dissolving into the space. No one knows. No one remembers. Indefinite observation mode is officially activated. The darkness of the porch gives way to the blinding light of a normal morning. You are sitting at a cafe again. exactly like that day in Karachi 20 years ago. Your life is a closed loop, defined and concluded by oblivion. You take the last sip of your tea, now gone cold. You place the exact coins on the scratched wooden table, not a dime extra, leaving no gratitude, creating zero impression of a generous man. You stand up. You step out into the sunlight. The stream of people glides by. A couple walks briskly, fingers intertwined. A father in a suit ruffles his little boy's hair while waiting for the red light. They laugh and talk. They are safe. They are living the fullest of the normal lives that you single-handedly stripped away from yourself. Your permanent absence from family dinners bought the presence of millions of strangers out there. That is the final, most brutal, and most silent lesson of the system. Peace is not naturally born. The tranquility of humanity is always paid in full by the evaporation of individuals who are never allowed to exist. There will be no memorials, no speeches, no tear-wiping embraces. Only anonymous stars carved deep into a cold stone wall that your family will never see. You pull up the collar of your gray coat. Your spine actively slumps, bland, mundane, invisible. You take a step back, blending into the crowd, and disappear.